As you're aware, we have actually called for a public inquiry into some malpractice in this whole penalty point system, and we're some really concerned about some problems within the system in terms of what is lawful to terminate and what isn't. And I mean, we believe that what's required is a review of the system in place around the use of the discretion that the guards use and the policy and processes in place within the Garda to oversee the exercise of that discretion. So, I mean, we have to look at what is lawful to terminate and what isn't, what criteria are used, if any, what process is used, are reasons set out, is there a paper trail, what monitoring and oversight provisions exist, what review or appeal mechanism exists to ensure that this discretion is exercised fairly. I mean, there has been allegations of close to 100,000 terminations in the last 5 years, and only a public inquiry by an independent, specially appointed individual can respond to these allegations and serious concerns raised in order to restore public confidence in the force.
Thank you. Deputy Ellis has a question too, so we'll bundle these two together for answer.
Minister, I know it goes without saying that the penalty points have contributed hugely to the amount of people lives that have been saved throughout the years. I just wanted to ask you in regards to those who drive unaccompanied by a full licence holder. And I think Section 54C has to be activated, if I'm not mistaken. And we do need primary legislation, if you could confirm that. And also, in regards to those who don't display L plates, could you just comment on what is planned in relation to that? Because once again, I think legislation is required. And in terms of people who are driving under the influence of drugs, you know, what are we planning to do in regards to the whole issue of drug driving, as opposed to people driving under the influence of drink?
And I'm going to be Flahuluk. 10 seconds for Deputy.
Just in relation to the whole penalty point system, earlier in question time, the Minister quite passionately spoke about how he was going to enforce the law for taxi drivers, and that's very admirable. I hope you'll be as quick to enforce the law when it comes to the stuff that's going on with the penalty points at the moment.
Okay,
be good.
So that was three in one answer.
Thank you very much, Deputies. Both the Minister and I are aware of the alleged claims regarding the alleged quashing of penalty points for road traffic offences. And when provided with the documents, the Minister did forward the list of all the allegations to the Minister for Justice, expressed his concern and asked that the matter be fully investigated. And this government totally believes that this matter has to be investigated fully. I understand that the Garda Commissioner has ordered an investigation of the allegations under the direction of Assistant Commissioner John O'Mahony. There are allegations at this stage. I know many deputies inside here have commented quite openly about them on the media recently, but it wouldn't be appropriate at this moment to comment further until the investigation is complete, and then the government makes the decision in relation to how it's going to respond to such an investigation. But just trust me when we say that this issue has been taken up most seriously and will be looked into to the highest degree, because it will have to be. In relation to a number of questions from Deputy Ellis, the issue in relation to the L plates is that if you drive without the appropriate L plates, you will be getting penalty points. Those who are learner drivers, if they get 6 penalty points, they will have their licence revoked. I think that's an important new change. There is going to be roadside testing in relation to drugs, and there will be a process put in place in order to achieve that. This will be in a two-stage process. The first is to ensure that we can do roadside drug testing, which I think everyone in this House would agree with. Obviously, at a later date, we hope to be able to provide the mechanisms for actually doing that, the mechanics for doing that as well. But initially, we will be doing roadside testing. There was a number of other questions there from the Deputy, which I will get back to you in writing.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll get penalty points for losing time on that, so we better move on. Questions 7 and 32. So 7 and 13
I
together.
propose to answer 7 and
32, sorry.
32 together.
Yes.
According to the census in 2011, around 1.14 million people drove to work or were passengers in a car, representing 69% of commuters. Very similar to 2006, when around 1.18 million people drove to work or were passengers in a car. Despite the fall in car commuting numbers due to lower numbers in employment, car mode share was higher in 2011, standing at 69% of commuters compared to 66% in 2006, which, of course, I noted with disappointment. However, I was, heartened to note that cycling numbers, up from 36,000 in 2006 to 39,000 for people travelling to work, and up from 54,000 to 61,000 for travel to work and education. This increase, although from a modest base, reverses a long-standing trend of less and less people commuting by bike. This government recognises the challenge ahead and remains committed to decreasing reliances on the private car. We are taking a two-pronged approach to improving sustainable commuting rates: investment in public transport and infrastructure to facilitate cycling and walking, allied to support for programmes to encourage people to make smarter travel decisions. In addition to funding facilities or infrastructure to make smarter travel safer and more attractive by users, my department funds a number of schemes to encourage smarter travel, including the travel element of the Green Schools programme, which is providing successful in securing behavioural change on the school run, a new Smarter Campuses programme, and Smarter Travel Workplaces, which helps employers to bring smarter travel to their workplaces. In the Greater Dublin area, my department works with the NTA to decrease reliance on private car use. Successful initiatives in the region include the Dublin Bike Scheme and continued investment in cycle lanes and pedestrian measures. The region is served by an extensive public transport network, greatly improved by the rollout of RTPI and the LEAP card over the last year. A reduction in car trips can only be achieved if we all make smarter travel choices. The government will continue to focus on facilitating and encouraging people to consider using public transport or walking and cycling wherever possible. Thank you.
Deputy Dooley.
Minister, I mean, I accept you've set out the headline changes, and you're obviously disappointed with them, and that's welcome. And obviously, an awful lot more has to be done in trying to develop a strategy to get more people back. I mean, if you go back to 1981, however, there's been very serious drop in the numbers using buses. Now, some of that can clearly be put down to, as economic times were better, there was a greater propensity for car ownership to increase, and people liked the freedoms associated with that. There was a transformation of our road network, and that helped too in terms of the reduction of the gridlock that was associated with the patch, so people felt it more convenient to use their cars. However, I think that the government would need to start encouraging people to a greater extent to use public transport. Look, it can't be laid just at your door. There are changes taking place now that I think are impacting on the use of public transport, and obviously it has to be recognised by the government that there's a social good associated with that modal shift away from the car to public transport. And that's where we get back into this discussion that we have in the past about trying to restructure CIE, fund it adequately and appropriately. And before you get into the cant, Minister, I'm aware that the previous government reduced the level of subvention, and you're following through on that. This year you've had to provide an additional 35 million. That's going to put a huge strain next year if CIE are going to have to manage without that, without having an overall restructuring. And I'd be concerned that the response, and I would make the same comment in relation to the previous government, I'd be concerned that the immediate response is put back on this subvention. That forces the operating companies to reduce service and increase ticket prices. And those two aspects, whilst they may resolve the economic imbalance that exists within the state companies, it acts as a very significant disincentive for people using public transport. So I think you're going to have to come forward with ways to mitigate the worst effects of having to increase fares and reduce service as best you can to try and retain the network during the recession, so that there is an adequate and appropriate public transport service there when the economy recovers.
Minister.
I can assure the Deputy, and I'm taking on board his comments very well, I can assure the Deputy that everything is being done to ensure that public transport network is maintained and enhanced from a qualitative way in particular to make customer journeys a better experience, whether it's Wi-Fi, the RTPI, the LEAP card, many other adjustments. I have to say that while surprised with some of the figures that was produced following on from the analysis, I was, a little bit taken aback, particularly in relation to cycling, because anecdotally, I think cycling in this country is gaining huge popularity, and particularly in relation to using it as a mode for school and for work. So, from my point of view, I certainly, anecdotally, and I think from sharing other people's experiences around here, they feel so the same as well, that cycling is being very much encouraged and is progressing. And I have to say, previous administration helped in relation to that, in relation to the tax scheme as well that was there for bikes, and it's continuing under this. I think we also need to see the end product from the funding that has gone out to the smarter travel areas programmes, to the active travel towns, to the funding going into the National Cycle Network, and to a number of other smarter travel initiatives, and see how those are going to impact on these statistics in the years to come. I'm greatly encouraged, Cathaoirleach, by the response that the government has got to the call for private investors to come on board in relation to the rollout of bike schemes across the other cities in the country. It is my ambition and the ambition of this government to have a bike scheme, or try and get bike schemes, into Galway, Cork, Limerick and Waterford. And I have to tell this House I'm greatly encouraged by the response from private investors to the government's advertising recently that we would look for partners in that pursuit. And I look forward to a bright future in that area.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Ellis, keep it to a minute, please, because Deputy Humphreys wants to ask.
Okay, the sound. I know you put down an awful lot of the drop in numbers and the use of cars to the fact that there's a lot less employment out there. But it's also down to the bus routes being cut. And many of the bus routes across the cities have been cut, and we're told on cost-saving reasons. But these services have been cut, particularly in working-class areas. In my own area, the 19 has been lost, the 1919A, and this has been a bone of contention. But not just in the cities. We have routes, primary routes, which once went into some of the villages like Ruskey and places like that. So we've lost numbers, and we've also given some of the functions to some of these private companies to use routes. So we are seeing a reduction. But what's not helping us also is the fact that we're increasing bus prices when we should be keeping them stable in terms of attracting people in, and I think that is going to go against us. And we do need to keep the subsidies in place. We can't keep cutting the subsidies because every other city in Europe is subsidising their transport.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, briefly.
Very briefly, I know the Deputy is making these comments in sincerity, but I mean, to be frank, Deputy, if we were to do everything that you said there, Dublin bus wouldn't be sustainable. It's unfortunate the prices had to be increased modestly. The Network Direct has been quite successful in many ways. I know there's people with issues with it. Nobody knows that better because they come to me. But it was necessary in order to ensure that from a financial point of view, Dublin Bus will be in a better position into the future. And I think in some cases, many of the issues that were raised by many resident groups around Dublin have been addressed, and I think Dublin Bus have done a very good job. Dublin Bus are operating in particular in a very difficult environment. We all know that. I don't think it's appropriate always just to be making reference to the fact that Dublin Bus has had to cut routes or has had to make changes. And they're doing so in the most modest way as they can to ensure as least disruption as possible and to ensure that they have a service that will operate to the public in a positive way going to the future. And I think they do that, and I think they do a fantastic job.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Humphreys. We have 3 minutes left for this question, and these questions.
Minister's response, and maybe I wanted to get in on the previous question, so I used the opportunity. Minister, you pointed out correctly there's been a huge growth in cyclists within the urban areas, and Dublin Bike has obviously played a very big role in that. But recent surveys have shown that there's a tiny minority of cyclists that break the law in quite a dangerous manner. Penalty points obviously wouldn't operate in that. But I asked the Minister at some stage to look again at an on-the-spot fine for cyclists that breach the rules of the road very clearly, about the traffic lights and cycling on footpaths, which is becoming a major urban issue with the increased investment in the previous government, the Premier Cycle Route along the canal, which Noel Dempsey funded. We can see that now, especially along the canals, where cyclists just blatantly ignore traffic lights and will cause a serious accident. So I'm not asking you to comment, but maybe you'd bring that back to the Senior Minister and look at an on-the-spot fine system for that.
I know the Deputy holds this issue passionately because he's spoken to me previously about it, and I actually do have some sympathy for his point of view. It is something that we will be looking at into the future. It's not something that there is a precedent for in relation to doing it, but it's certainly something that we will be looking at into the future. I have witnessed the very same issues myself, and particularly at certain times of the day, it could cause a very serious disruption. Thank you.
Very quickly.
I was reading the newspaper in the last couple of days, and maybe, I don't know, would you consider this? I didn't actually think it was serious when I originally read it, but it is. They have, on Regent's Canal in London, they've actually developed swimming lanes, so you can actually swim to work. Would you consider that after cleaning up the canals? You want a shower for the canals in Dublin, though.
Anyway, thank you for that. I have a message to read. From Shannon Dail. Shannon Dail has passed the Social Welfare Bill 2012 without amendment, and has accepted the Appropriation Bill 2012 without recommendation. Thank you. Move on now to questions 8, 12 and 19, I'm told, are taken together. Is that right?
That's correct. Thank you, Carter. I intend to take questions 8, 12 and 19 together. I am glad to report that 10.2 million, or almost 40% of the value of the recent local sports capital allocations, were allocated to projects located in designated disadvantaged areas. I will supply the Deputy with a list of all the allocations to projects in disadvantaged areas. There are no plans for another round of the Sports Capital Programme at the moment, but I hope that if funding becomes available, it will be possible to do so in the future. Decisions on the features of the programme and the amount to be allocated will be considered in the context of the prevailing budgetary framework. In relation to allocations to clubs and organisations that do not own or have a long lease on the property they use, I do not have a list of such allocations, and the creation of such a list would involve a disproportionate amount of time. However, I can confirm that clubs, organisations who did not own their own land or did not have a long lease were able to apply for a modest capital grant of up to €25,000 to upgrade their facilities this year. This is the first time that the programme has been extended to such groups. In addition, applications that were only seeking funding for sports equipment did not need to demonstrate evidence of title.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy McLennan.
For his answer. I'm just hoping that you will push hard for a second round of sports capital grants, because, you know, I think the value of them, you know, to people's health and mental health and well-being, obesity, and for I think even job creation. You know, you can't put a figure on it really. Just research shows that employed people are 50% more likely to participate in sport than those who are unemployed. And in terms of social disadvantage, there is a clear link between levels of educational attainment and participation in sport. For example, those with a third level education are 3.2 times more likely to participate in sport than those with primary education only, according to research for 2009. Prisoners in Ireland are 25 times more likely to come from and return to a seriously deprived area. Given that as a country we now have almost 450,000 people out of work and thousands of others who are underemployed, it is imperative that the issue of equity is placed centre stage when funding is being allocated for sporting projects. Moreover, there is a close link between sporting activity and good mental health, and between obesity, poor diet and disadvantage. Will the Minister give an undertaking to embark on an information campaign regarding the Sports Capital Programme that is specifically targeted at clubs and organisations that work with disadvantaged people and in disadvantaged areas? And I'd also like to ask the Minister, there's 4 million left for regional and national projects that still have to be allocated. And I'm just wondering if the Minister can confirm if any boxing clubs will benefit at regional or national level, considering their fantastic performances at the Olympic Games.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you very much. First of all, just in relation to the question you asked in relation to another round, I would hope that we can negotiate with the Department of Finance. And I'm asking for your support, and I'm asking the support of all sides of the House. And I think money spent on sport, and when I came home from the Olympics, I got into some difficulty in relation to the way I was misinterpreted what I was saying. I was making the point very simply. Money spent on sport is money saved to the state. They're now talking about diabetes, that 250,000 people in the next 10 years could have diabetes. If we can have a healthier society, we can have more people out there fit. We won't need as many doctors, nurses and hospitals if we have a fitter society. In relation to the question you asked me in relation to the boxing and in relation to disadvantaged areas, 40% this time, 40%. And in Dublin this time what happened was we would have had more in disadvantaged areas, but what happened was in Dublin I had more money than we actually needed, and I'll tell you why. Because over 50% of the projects that were evaluated in Dublin were marked invalid. So we had enough of money to actually accommodate every club that was valid in Dublin. That wasn't the situation in every other county, and that meant then that I wasn't able to target more disadvantaged areas. But 40% is the highest since the scheme has started. And first of all, I want to say that I feel that's an achievement, because that was the whole point of the scheme, to try and target areas of disadvantage, and I think we have succeeded in that. In relation to boxing clubs, you're quite correct. Boxing clubs, and particularly boxing in itself. Last year, when I came into office, and before the Olympics, I identified that boxing was doing great work for particularly, they take in all sections of society, they train them, they look after them, and they put great discipline into them. I put 1.2 million in place that time, before the Olympics. And what I did with that was, the Irish Amateur Boxing Association themselves, they distribute that money for me, because boxing clubs, they don't have as many people in clubs that they would have in football clubs, rugby clubs, or whatever, and these people are there training them and helping them and working with them, and they don't have the time to be able to be making applications to Sports Capital or to county councils or whatever the case may be. So I asked the Irish Amateur Boxing Association, and they targeted clubs all over the country. And if you ask me, the two best things that I spent money on since I came in as Minister, one of them was in relation to swimming pools, and I have to say this was a scheme that made it cheaper for pools to be run all over the country, and that has worked very well for local authorities. And the second one was the boxing. You asked a straight question, I give you a straight answer. I am going to do something for boxing in the new year. I intend, if at all possible, again, and I have actually secured the money, I intend to put a scheme in place for boxing again, and particularly because it did so well in the Olympics, and they did the country proud. And even today, I was at an event where Katie Taylor won the Female of the Year award by the Irish Times, and she has been a great ambassador. But not alone her, all the other boxers that did this country proud, they went to London, they did the country, they lifted the morale of the country, and that's why I'm targeting boxing again this year, because they deserve it.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, but okay, just very quickly, because there are two other questioners.
I'm just delighted to hear that, Minister. I had the honour of watching Katie Taylor box on a couple of occasions, and it is well deserved. She gives country such a lift in the summer. Delighted to hear it.
Thank you. Deputy Wallace.
Minister, as you know, Wexford got 900,000 in the capital sports grants, and that was given the money that they had at their disposal. That was fair enough. But obviously, the concern that I do have, and the serious concern in Wexford, among the soccer fraternity in particular, and the public in general down there, is that the manner in which the money was distributed does appear to lack fairness. And the feeling in Wexford is that maybe there has been some political interference, something that we had hoped we had left behind us. Soccer is probably the biggest sport in the county now in Wexford, and we got 40,000 out of that money, which means we got less than 5%. And there was 18 clubs plus the Football League itself applied for money, and only 3 clubs got 40,000 between them. I mean, it just doesn't look balanced, and there's some very disgruntled people in the county, and the notion that there may have been political interference is a bit frightening today. And I would ask you, Minister, in the case of more funding coming available in the next 12 months, that you would consider the soccer clubs in a favourable manner. I do realise that some clubs were rejected for one reason or another, and I've looked at some of the refusals, but it does appear to me as if you wanted to refuse anybody, it was actually possible. There are tight rules, and it's very hard for everyone to meet the criteria, and it would have been practically, I say, it was almost impossible to have an application 100% perfect. And just anyway, you know what I'm saying.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much. Well, look at first of all, the first thing I did, I looked at the scheme for the last 10 years, and I looked at areas that had done very well. And I looked at areas that had done more than well, and I won't be political about that. And what I did on this occasion was, I looked at areas that did badly. And what I did was, I increased their percentage by 20%. And places like Carlow, Wicklow, smaller counties like that, I left Leitrim alone because I had a small population, a small base of money. But what I did do, and I did it fairly, I did it per capita. And you're quite correct, Wexford got what they were entitled to get. And I'll answer the question then, another question you asked. And the big issue was, everybody was waiting to see, was I going to give Mayo 1.5 times everybody else? I didn't. I gave them to the penny what they were entitled to get. And I got into a lot of difficulty with it. If you take up the local paper this week, you'll see criticism why I didn't support this club and that club. There was no way I could satisfy everybody that I could satisfy. When you have 270 million worth of applications, you have 25 million to give out. We did it as fairly as we could. Now, the big problem, and maybe this is something that you might raise again here, and it's something, and Deputy McGillen is right as well, we need to support and help clubs to maybe help them in relation to understand the rules. And part of the problem, and it's not, you know, ordinary people. I have professional people, solicitors sending me in information now, and they still don't know the rules, and they still don't look at the rules. And I'll give you a simple example. If you're actually applying for a grant to the state, and if that grant is given by the state have to get a charge on your property. And if that property has to be registered. And solicitors was giving us leases of 6 months, up to a year, up to 5 years. Now, what I did do this time, anybody that wanted to draw down a grant up to 25,000, the first time it ever happened, I said they don't need to take a charge against the property. I allowed these clubs to be actually able to draw down without having to have the property registered. But once the state, there's a major investment above 25,000, you must have a lease for 22 years plus a day. And solicitors still insisted sending it in for 15 years, 5 years, and in one case an application came in, and I extended the closing date this time. They never had as much time to make application. It closed on the 1st of June, and one of the leases was up to the 15th of July that year. So it was even invalid by the time he sent it in to me. And then he sent in a new one, and he sent in a new one then in the middle of the campaign, and what happened was it was a 15-year. And if he read the guidelines of it, he would know it was 22 years and 1 day. I did this as fairly as I could. I distributed the money as equal as I could. I tried to look at every county. I try to balance between urban and rural, soccer, Gaelic and other sports. The big problem was, and the big problem, and you sent me, and some of your colleagues sent me on ones in relation to Wexford, they were invalid. And the one thing I didn't do, because I didn't want another situation arising here, in my own club of Westport, there was a soccer and a Gaelic club. The Gaelic club was invalid, and I got criticism over it. I took no club out that was invalid, and I asked the department anything that was invalid not to send up to me, and that didn't happen. So I did it as fairly as I could. When you have that limited amount of money, you're never going to be able to satisfy everybody. But at least there'll be clubs out there, and you're involved in football and you're involved in sport. At least we have tried to provide facilities for the future for young boys and girls in this country.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. And I can't see how the papers in Mayo could be at all critical of you, Minister. I know you've been very fair. Minister, first of all, I think the sports capital grants are very important to communities. And certainly what Dublin's got, we've been grateful for. But like the likes of boxing clubs and things that are trying to grow up in the city are working at a disadvantage. Because often we use a number of grants to try and put that infrastructure there. And the rural areas, I'm very welcome, and I'm delighted to get it. And I don't mean for a second it should be reduced, it should be increased. Gets 52 million for social infrastructure in rural areas through the Leader Fund. But all other avenues of funding for urban areas, and that goes for Cork, Limerick, Galway and Dublin alike, have been closed down. So if we want to develop a boxing club or a community centre with sporting facilities, we normally would have used the sports capital grants as well as the dormant accounts and several other accounts. All those areas have now been closed off for urban areas. And there is some access, and welcome access, for rural areas through the 52 million through the Leaders programme. Minister, at some stage when you're speaking to your colleagues, can you have a look at how we can fund especially deprived urban areas across the country, because we're losing out. The social infrastructure is falling into bad repair. We need to open up the funding that was closed, and I understand why it was closed by the previous government, but we do have to look again at the dormant accounts and other social funds that were there before to allow urban Ireland to start getting back on its feet again. Thank you, Chair.
Very much, Deputy. And I have to say, you know, you're right, quite correct. That's why I am pleased this time that the disadvantaged areas, and it would have actually been more, as I explained to you about the situation in Dublin. And you know, you're speaking my language, and I'll tell you why. What really annoys me as Minister for Sport, every other department wants to be Minister for Sport as well. And we have scattered funding in education, we have it in leader, we have it in health, and we have it. I agree with you. And I've been complaining about this since I came into office. I believe that all that funding should be put into sport, and the Department of Sport should be dealing with sport and sport only. You have the ludicrous situation, you have it in education, you have it in health, you have it in environment, and it's crazy. You're quite correct. Then we could target, you know, exactly what you're talking about. We could target isolation, we could target urban and rural areas, we could have more schemes. But I will say this to you. And I'm glad to hear you, and I'm glad to hear all the other speakers. And I am asking you for support. I think we need to put more money into sport. It's money that's well spent. This was the first scheme since 2008, and it was a great achievement to get it opened. And I hope that we can continue it again next year. I think it would be important, even if we didn't have the money that we had this year, even if we had 20 million next year, it would be great to open it again. And I'd love to see it happening. The clubs that didn't get any funding this time, they're at least validated. But the clubs that weren't validated, that they would now be able to get themselves validated and get back into it again. 4 years was too long to leave clubs without being able to make application. And remember this, and you're right about urban and rural. And in Dublin, you know, the local authorities provide a lot of facilities. In rural Ireland, that doesn't happen. But I don't care. I like to see sporting facilities to be supported in urban or rural. I don't care where, because money put into sport, and we're putting, you know, the amount of money, as somebody quoted here earlier, keeping a prisoner in jail. We're far better off to be putting it in sport. We're far better off to be putting it into boxing, who deal and help and support us in relation to antisocial behaviour in this country. And I want to say this and put on the record of it all every opportunity I get. Thank the volunteers, because remember, it's the volunteers in this country that keep sport alive. It's the volunteers to go out there and collect the money. It's them to collect the local contribution. It's them that's training the young people. It's them that's doing the work for government, and we don't thank them enough. And we're bloody lucky in this country that we have so many volunteers to prepare to give up their time to help support young people in Ireland.
Deputy Dooley, do you have a question?
Thanks very much.
Nice and neat and tight now.
Yeah, absolutely, and I welcome the opportunity just to contribute briefly, and I'm not going to reopen the debate to any great extent. Whilst I recognise the Minister has indicated the fairness and equity that was attributable to the way in which the funding was distributed on a county-by-county basis, I think you're right. If you follow the per capita model, you're certainly, you're covered there. There is some concern. It's close to Christmas. I'm not going to get into it, but there's some concern about how or what criteria was used within a county. So that in relation to Deputy Wallace, there was 900,000. There was about the same for Clare. How some clubs would feel that, you know, they had as good a project as the next one. One got the 80,000, the other got nothing. One got 40,000, the other got nothing. You'll have the same. I mean, I know there are issues there, and at the end of the day, somebody has to make a judgment call. Some clubs were a little bit annoyed that information seemed to be circulating days in advance. It was felt that some were being softened up and being told, looks like you're not making the grade. Others were being told it's looking good. Look, I know the way politics works on the ground. I know some of it is based on a flyer, some of it is based on a hunch, some of it is based on having a little bit of information. So maybe you'd reflect on it, Minister. Maybe you'd talk a little bit about the criteria that was used in terms of how the wash was moved around from east to west,
well, look,
or north to south.
First of all, I'll just give you an example of a colleague of your own.
1 minute.
When we put it on the website, what he did. Very simple. I mean, you're quite correct. We're all political animals in here, and let's not pretend we're not. And I'll tell you what a colleague of yours did. He looked at the website, he picked every club that was in his area, and he wrote to me about every club, making representation for them. So he was going to hit the jackpot. He was going to get something right, so he was. So now, like when you have, in a county like Mayo, 18.5 million worth of projects, no matter 770,000. Of course, there was always going to be people that were disappointed. And you know, people have said to me, well, you know, government deputies got this side. But you take me over, we have 4 out of 5. And even then they weren't satisfied. Even in my own party, they weren't
10
satisfied.
seconds.
I did the best I could. You were never going to get it right. Deputy Wallace is right. I mean, you were always going to have disappointed people. And, you know, the people that got it. Now, I could throw the question back to you. Tell me the ones in Clare you would like to see that didn't get money.
Time up. The bell has gone on that, to use boxing terms. Sorry, can we move on to question number 9, please? In the name of Michael Moynihan.
On the 24th of July last, the government decided to provide an additional PSO funding of 36 million to CIE to ensure the companies could continue to operate for the rest of 2012. This will bring the total PSO subvention for this year to 278 million, higher than the subvention level for 2010, and is the fifth highest level of subvention ever. In November, 16 million of the additional subvention was paid by the National Transport Authority to CIE, and the remaining allocation of 20 million was paid by the NTA to CIE last week.
Mr. Deputy Dooley.
Thanks for that, Minister. Whilst I kind of ties in with what I talked about earlier, what's really at the heart of this is, you know, have you made provisions for next year? In light of the fact that 36 million was required this year, whilst I accept that legislation has passed through this House today and previously went through the Senate, it will provide CIE with the capacity to borrow to a greater extent, and perhaps that will be helpful. But there is still real concern in my party, and I think certainly amongst the workers and those who use the CIE services, that, you know, in a deteriorating financial environment, that the consumer is going to be hit on the double, really, as I said in response to an earlier question, hitting the double in terms of increased ticket price, reduced service, thereby further diminishing the quality of the network. Thank you very much.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. 2013 is going to be a tough year for CIE. There's no way of saying it any other way. There is a certain amount of funding. We as a department have defined and stated what the level of funding will be for a number of years. We've put in a 3-year programme, and next year it'll be 226 million. But we're working very closely with CIE to ensure that they can provide the services with the subvention. In 2013, there's a number of cost-cutting measures across all of the companies. You are aware that Irish Rail has already had negotiations and agreed to a level of cost-cutting measures, and Dublin Bus and Bus Éireann, some are in negotiations at the moment. There is, as everyone is aware, issues which I don't want to necessarily get into here in relation to Bus Éireann at the moment, but as a department we're obviously keeping a very close watchful eye on that. And I do thank everyone in this House for the speedy passage of the CIE borrowings bill in the last, it was yesterday actually, to increase the borrowing limit for CIE, which is necessary given the environment in which we're working. But it would be wrong of me not to say to everyone in the House here with an interest in transport that 2013 is going to be a big challenge when it comes to CIE and the companies under CIE. But we're working very closely as a department with the board of CIE, with the chief executives of the companies and the relevant boards of the 3 subsidiaries to ensure that we can see through in 2013, try and get more passengers, try and cut costs, and try and see what other measures are possible to sustain the services that we all need as a country, and especially for the economic activity that pertains from same. Thank you.
Yeah, Minister, thanks for that. I mean, different people have different views on public transport and the importance of public transport, and obviously there's significant competition in the market now in terms of the issuance of licences and with the private bus operators between certain centres of population utilising the motorway network, and that's putting a significant pressure on particularly the rail and indeed Bus Éireann. As a Labour man, are you satisfied that Minister Varadkar is as committed to the public transport network as you are?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Well, this government is very satisfied towards it. It's certainly Christmas time in here anyway, isn't it? This government is very talk about teeing something up. This government is very committed to the public transport network, and I can assure you that I work very closely with Deputy Varadkar in relation to the issues that you have just stated. But look, 2013 is going to be a very challenging year, but day on day we are working very closely with everyone to maintain the services and to ensure that the services can be delivered in a satisfactory manner. I think really the push needs to be about customer experience to get more people to use the services, and I think the additional use of RTPI, Wi-Fi, creating better customer experience for everyone when they use the services is crucially important, and measures are going to be continually undertaken to try and achieve that. I also think that the commercial angle of CIE and how the individual 3 companies' subsidiaries commercially exploit their services needs to improve. And I have worked very closely with CIE and the subsidiaries, very closely indeed, even up to the recent past, to ensure that in 2013 there is going to be considerable changes and focusing from the companies to ensure they commercially exploit the excellent facilities and services that they do have. And deputies would take note that take Irish Rail, for instance. Irish Rail has new offerings across the country in relation to the services that if you book early, you get a concession. And it's stuff like this that we need to promote in order to ensure more people use public transport. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much to the deputies for their questions, to the ministers for their replies, and to the staff for assisting us in the debate here this evening. I'd like to... sorry, I have one message here, another one from Shannon Aaron. Shannon Aaron has passed the Finance Local Property Tax Bill 2012 without amendment. So that summarises the debate. I'd like to wish you all a very happy Christmas and a very happy New Year. And the vulner du an tid den law new, tá an dal acho go dí lachar taréis de cédín an sé deg éanar. Gá is a trí deg. Thank you. Nolig honna yív.
Irme Joshua Tierna to non lefa de Corfu, on Shin de Stuart Narganivera, agus Narta Gross de Rodaran, on Ida Hurt Concreca. On a screwsa tos no for Arnid of Reher, Ox Arnilagania Fasta, has got 3 the creek no freed, 3 Christar Dirna Amen. Direct to beseech to your Lord our actions by the holy inspirations, and carry them on by their grace assistance, that every word and work of ours may always begin from thee, and by thee be happily ended through Christ our Lord.
I have received notice from the following senators that they propose to raise the following matters on the adjournment. Senator Lorraine Higgins, to ask the Minister for Transport to set out a policy programme through the NRA regarding the adequate lining of all secondary and regional routes and the illumination of bus stops on all primary routes in Ireland in the interest of safety. Senator Michael Darcy, to ask the Minister for Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation the number of visits from foreign direct investment companies and individuals who are attached to the IDA to County Wexford in 2012 to date. Senator Deirdre Clune, the need for the Minister for Education and Skills to outline his plans for fee-paying schools in the education system. Senator Colin Burke, the need for the Minister for Health to put in place a comprehensive testing programme for children with spina bifida and hydrocephalus, as there is a severe difficulty in assessing vital urology services. Senator Michael Cummesky, the need for the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform to outline if the residents of Sean McDiarmid, one of the signatories of the 1916 proclamation, will receive investment funding for the development of tourist services and facilities, and to assist in the continuing conservation of this historical site as the centenary commemoration of 1916 approaches. Senator Trevor O'Flaherty. Godorfe Antara Kormake Soshile, Brishu Shees, Marjala Nadini, Onchgame Jobridge, Akorwas Chartle Rin, Agras Achniot, No Kolok Stodge, Agus KVH Steve, Koenok Ibost, Leshandram Shin in the year Nishkema. I regard the matters raised as suitable for discussion in the adjournment, and I have selected the Senators Senators Darcy, Burke, Cummesky and O'Flaherty, and they will be taken at the conclusion of business. Senator Higgins and Clune may give notice on another day of the matters they wish to raise. The Leader.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. The order of business is item 1 to 5 on the order paper. Item 1, motion regarding the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund to be taken at the conclusion of the order of business without debate. Item 2, Health and Social Care Professionals Amendment Bill 2012, Committee in remaining stages, to be taken on the conclusion of item 1 and to conclude no later than 2:15 p.m. Item 3, Europol Bill 2012, Committee in remaining stages, to be taken at 2:15 and to conclude no later than 3 o'clock, if not previously concluded. Item 4, Social Welfare Bill 2012, second stage, to be taken at 3 p.m. and to conclude no later than 5:30 p.m. with the contribution of group spokespersons not to exceed 8 minutes, all other senators not to exceed 5 minutes. Ministers to be given 5 minutes to reply. Item 5, motion regarding the extension of the Credit Institution Stabilisation Act 2010, to be taken on the conclusion of item 4, and the time to be given to this debate should not exceed 1 hour, with the contribution of group spokespersons not to exceed 6 minutes, all other senators not to exceed 3 minutes. The Minister to be given 5 minutes to reply.
Senator O'Brien.
Leader, I think all of us understand that this is a very important week for the Shannon. I would firstly like to thank you for the scheduling of the Social Welfare Bill over 3 days. I think it's important that it's debated properly here. And actually, I think in general we'll have more time to debate this bill in the Shannon here than was had in the Dáil. And that is important. And I hope that we have a reasoned debate and that people will listen to the arguments put forward on both sides of the House. And that's for later on today and tomorrow and the next day. But I do look forward to that debate where we will be putting forward our views and discussing our amendments tomorrow. And I'm sure there will be contributions from all sides on it. Can I ask you, Leader, to raise with Minister Hogan? I'm particularly concerned to understand that my colleagues in Dublin City Council are now facing a bill of 3.4 million, 2 weeks after passing their budget, on the basis now that the Minister has said that local authorities are liable for the proposed property tax on their houses. Now, 2 weeks ago in Dublin City were passing their budget. My Fianna Fáil colleagues there looked for a postponement of the budget to get clarification from the Minister as to who would be liable and how this would be paid. Excuse me. Dublin City Council, as I said, 21,771 social houses, all of which now will be liable, which is a bill of about 3.4 million. Fingal County Council, my own local authority, today are having their budget. They have 5,077 social houses, and if you extrapolate that out, you'll have an approximate bill in a full year of 1.6 million. Dunleary Rathdown, about 4,000 social houses. Their budgets, their councillors are expected to pass their budget tomorrow. Now, what I want to know from you, Leader, and through your offices is, did Minister Hogan and the Department of the Environment make any effort to consult the local authorities about this? Was there any communication at all with local authority members and with county managers and city managers? Has his department carried out an assessment of the number of local authority houses in each area and how much the overall bill will be to each council? Was there any proper examination of this, or was Minister Hogan actually hoping that people would not notice these changes? Many of the local authorities in this country, as all colleagues will be aware, are passing their budgets over the next few weeks. At the very least, it's important that locally elected members have an idea before they pass their budget is what additional bills will be that their local authorities will be liable for. Now then the question is, how do the local authorities actually pay for it? They're either going to pay for it in two ways. They're either going to up the rents of those living in local authority houses to pay for these bills, or they're going to cut services. Now this is in the context of the fact that the household charge originally last year brought in, that we supported, was supposedly to fund local government. But every local authority, take my own as an example of Fingal, were hit with a €1 million cut in September because they didn't reach their targets for the household charge. Now we have a property tax that I've already argued here, and we'll be talking at second stage later in the week on, that is particularly anti-urban and anti-Dublin. And what you're going to have a situation is that these local authorities now are going to be asking to pass a budget on the basis of apparently funding local government, which it's not going to do, and are going to be hit with an additional bill. As I said, Dublin City, 3.4 million. So I would simply like to know, Leader, did the Department of the Environment and the Minister for the Environment consult the county and city managers? Has the department a list of the number of social houses in each I'll be finished now, Ciara, thank you, in each local authority area, and have they actually an approximate cost of what that will be to each local authority? Furthermore, why did the Minister ignore the recommendation in the Thornhill report that wasn't published for 8 months, and one of those recommendations was that social housing would be exempt, and social housing, the housing stock that our local authorities have would be exempt. That's been completely set aside. I don't think it's fair on either the people who work in the local authorities, or in particular our local elected councillors who are expected to pass budgets without knowing the full story. So I would be grateful to get your clarification here this afternoon, Leader. Thank you.
Senator O'Keefe.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. And perhaps before I proceed, I would, on behalf of the Labour Group, like to express our condolences on the enormous tragedy in the US last week, the deaths of 20 small children, and the deaths of those teachers who tried to protect them. And I think we would all in this House like to express our sorrow for that, and perhaps to ask the Leader on behalf of all of us to write and to make that expression on all our behalfs. I would like to agree, if I might, with Senator O'Brien for a moment, and say that I too am glad that the Leader is able to ring-fence that time for the social welfare debate. It is important. It has obviously been a cause of concern to many people on all sides of the House and in the wider community. And I look forward to a debate that is robust and fair, and that we can reflect not just on the difficulties that have arisen from the bill, but also look at some of the positive aspects of it, and to acknowledge the work that has been done by Minister Burton and by the Cabinet in order to try to contain and to retain enormous levels of payment for the many people who require them. I would like also to acknowledge the comments of the IMF overnight in relation to Ireland and in relation to what may happen next year, and that their, if you like, their commitment to encourage our European partners to implement the pledges made in relation to breaking the relationship between sovereign debt and bank debt, and also in relation to, that if we're struggling next year and if growth is poorer in Ireland because it potentially will be poorer in the US and in Europe, that perhaps we will be allowed, if you like, to defer any further cuts that might arise from that. And I think that obviously will come into the debate early in the new year. But certainly I think we should acknowledge what they have said. And finally, Cathaoirleach, I would like also to express my concern and our concern in relation to the ongoing difficulties in Northern Ireland, and to say that, to join with politicians there who have called for for peace to be restored in relation to the difficulty over the flying of the Union Jack, and that those people might stand back and consider the great damage they're doing to the reputation both north and south.
Senator O'Brien.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Today, Leader, I would just like to bring up the subject of foreign aid, and indeed I would like to ask you to call the Minister for Foreign Affairs, I think, in to have a debate with us all. Because as the months go by and the years go by of these times of austerity, I mean, the latest is chemotherapy. Anybody here know anybody with cancer? Can you imagine having cancer and having to go in and pay €75 per dose of chemotherapy? It's not per day, it's per dose. Remember prime time and the lady carrying her son up the stairs. Remember the amount of times I've asked, could we ring fence a couple of million of a budget for paediatric home care? Remember the child in Selbridge who's Down syndrome, who's down to a day and a half a week. I will remind you of the scandal recently in Uganda where, just let's go back to 2010, where we gave Uganda 33 million. 4 million went missing this year, went into somebody's bank account. This is proven, this is fraudulent. In the same year, 2010, that we, the Irish state, gave 33 million to Uganda, the Ugandan government, spent $740 million on 6 very smart something fighter jets. I can't even pronounce them, but they're some sort of nuclear fighter jets. $740 million on nuclear fighter jets. Irish aid giving 33 million to the Ugandan government, which has been used fraudulently, at least 4 million is. You know, let's go back to Bertie Ahern and our reputational interest. He was right at those times of rich and plenty to put Ireland up on the world stage. He was right to think of a reputational interest. But today we have to think about our citizens. Each and every one of you senators are meeting people month by month, week by week, who are in need, who are in desperation, people whose mortgages are about to default, the stress they're suffering, the emotional stress, the financial stress. 624 million we plan to spend in 2013. This represents 0.53%. Perhaps we could think, even begin to think in 2013 of shaving this down to 0.5%. Forget the 0.3%. This would save circa 24 million. And I let all of you just put that 24 million in your pockets for the next 3 days and imagine what you might do with that 24 million. 10 years ago, Africa received 7 times the amount that Marshall aid was given to Europe following the Second World War. And just to go back to my 0.5% idea, and those of you who are interested in our standing in the United Nations and in our reputational interest, we would still be in and around the 9th or 10th per capita charity giver in the world to foreign aid. So, Leader, can you please, in the new year, as a matter of urgency, grant us a debate on foreign aid, and could we please make plans going forward for the next 5 years till we get our own country in ship shape and charity begins at home?
Senator Norris.
Thank you very much. Following on from Senator O'Brien, could I ask that we might take on Thursday, perhaps at this time, a half-hour debate to pass item number 12 about violence in the Congo. It will cost us nothing, but it will give support to those brave people, including Irish people, who are working there to prevent this kind of violence. I'm reserving my comments on the social welfare bill for the debate later on this afternoon. But I'm very glad that Senator O'Keefe raised the business of the killings at Sandy Hook. It was an appalling situation and highlights the problem of violence that is not confined to the United States of America. Professor Skinner many years ago demonstrated that when a population of rats gets beyond a certain level, violence breaks out endemically, and it's the same with the human. And we're seeing it all over the world, in Norway, even in China, this kind of mass turning on innocent victims. Now, in America, you have the problem of what they call a gun culture. I don't see how a gun can be connected to culture. It's not in my idea of culture, because it's a culture of death. I know there are frontier people, and they go back to that all the time. But they should properly confront their history. their country was founded upon the massacre of the indigenous people.